The year was 1887, and the plains of Wyoming stretched like a scar under the dying sun. At the far edge of Silver Ridge, Ethan Cole worked his land in silence. Once, laughter used to fill his ranch, his wife, Grace, his little ones, Daisy and Sam. But Grace had died the day the twins were born, and since then, the ranch had grown quiet. The wind was his only companion now, and even it seemed to whisper ghosts back at him. That evening, Ethan saw a figure at the fence line, a woman moving slow, wrapped in a faded blanket the color of dust. Her dark hair was tangled by the wind. Her eyes, deep and steady, watched the ground like someone following invisible footprints. He rode closer, boots thudding against the earth. "You lost?" he called. The woman looked up. "No, sir, just looking for work." Her name was Naya, an Apache widow who had buried both her husband and her child during the border raids. She carried nothing but a small bundle tied with leather string. Ethan hesitated. He'd heard enough stories to know what the town thought of Indians. "You can clean the barn," he finally said. "Sleep in the loft. Don't come near the house." Naya nodded once. No bitterness, no pleading. Just that quiet acceptance of someone who'd run out of pride long ago. By nightfall, the ranch had gone still again. Ethan sat by the window, watching dust curl through the moonlight. That's when he heard it, a song. Soft, low, haunting. Words he couldn't understand, drifting on the wind from the barn. The horses, usually restless after dark, were quiet, utterly still. He stepped outside. The night was cool, and the stars looked close enough to touch. The melody carried through the dry air, the kind of sound that makes a man stop breathing just to listen. He pushed the barn door open. There she was, Nia, sitting cross-legged on a bed of straw, her palms open toward the horses. Her voice trembled, ancient and sorrowful, yet somehow full of peace. "Who are you singing to?" Ethan asked, his voice rougher than he meant it to be. She didn't look up. "To those who haven't found their way home," she said quietly. For a moment, Ethan thought she meant ghosts. Then he realized she meant herself. He stood there, hat in hand, not sure whether to thank her or tell her to stop. But something about her presence, the stillness she carried, made him lower his voice. "Don't keep the horses up too long," he muttered, then turned to leave. As he walked back to the house, he glanced at the sky again. The stars were still bright, but for the first time in years, the silence didn't hurt so much. The next morning broke dry and pale. A thin veil of dust drifted over Silver Ridge, carried by the kind of wind that whispered through fences and bones alike. The ranch woke slow, roosters crowing, boots scraping gravel, and the low snort of restless horses. Naya was already awake. She moved like a shadow across the yard, quiet, measured, her hands calloused yet steady. She didn't talk much, didn't need to. Her presence was a kind of silence that made men lower their voices without knowing why. When she entered the barn, the horses, usually jumpy around strangers, settled down like children hearing a familiar tune. Red Davis, the youngest ranch hand, leaned against the post, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "Spookiest damn thing I ever seen," he muttered. "She's got him under some kind of spell." Ethan Cole, standing near the gate, shot him a look sharp enough to cut leather. "No such thing as spells," he said. Red shrugged. "Then how come they only calm down when she's around?" Ethan didn't answer. Truth was, he'd noticed it too. The horses that used to buck and kick now stood still when she brushed their coats. She'd hum in her Apache tongue, low, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. The barn felt alive again, but gentler. That afternoon, Ethan found her coiling ropes outside the corral. The sun baked the earth into gold, and sweat glimmered on her forehead. One of the ropes had cut deep into her palm. Blood trickled down, staining the dust. "You should wrap that," he said, walking over. She smiled faintly, not stopping her work. "In my land," she said, her voice soft but firm, "strong ones are not those who never bleed, but those who never stop." Ethan froze. There was something in the way she said it, not proud, not pitiful, just true. He looked at her hands, at the dirt under her nails, and felt an ache in his chest he couldn't name. That evening, the ranch house glowed faintly under the waning light. Inside, Daisy and Sam cried again, their tiny voices cutting through the stillness. Ethan tried the same tricks every father learns too late. A story, a song, a promise that Mama's watching from heaven. None of it worked. He sat on the edge of the bed, helpless. The walls seemed to close in, painted with the memory of Grace, his late wife, the scent of her hair, the warmth of her laughter, the ghost that refused to leave. Outside, Naya worked by lantern light, patching a torn saddle strap. The faint cry of the children reached her ears. She didn't move, but her lips pressed together. She knew that sound. The sound of a heart breaking over and over until all that's left is the rhythm of survival. The night wind carried her voice again, soft, wordless, a hum born of the desert. The melody floated through the open window, brushing over the crying children like a mother's hand. Inside, Daisy's sobs quieted. Sam's breathing slowed. Ethan lifted his head, realizing what he was hearing, that same voice from the barn. He didn't go outside. Didn't need to. He just sat there, listening. For the first time in a long while, the ranch felt like it was breathing again. The cold came early that winter. By sundown, frost crept along the barn windows, and the wind clawed at every crack in the ranch house walls. Inside, Ethan Cole paced across the wood floor, boots thudding, trying to hush the cries that tore through the night. Daisy sobbed in her bed, clutching her blanket tight, and Sam sat upright beside her, face wet with tears. Ethan tried everything, a story, a song, even the promise that Mama was watching from heaven. But the crying only grew louder, sharper, until it filled every corner of the house. He ran a hand through his hair, exhausted, helpless. Grace used to handle this. She had a way of making peace fall over a room like a soft blanket. But she was gone, and all Ethan had left was silence and two frightened children who didn't understand why. Outside, in the dark, Naya heard the sound. It wasn't just crying. To her ears, it was something deeper. It was the echo of souls left untended. She had heard that sound once before, on the night her own baby died in her arms beneath a black sky that never seemed to end. She didn't think. She just moved. The wind whipped her hair as she crossed the yard, boots crunching over frost. She hesitated only once at the porch, remembering his rule. Don't come near the house. But the sound of those children tore through her heart like a knife. Naya pushed open the door. Ethan turned fast, startled, ready to shout. But the words caught in his throat. Naya stood in the doorway, her shawl dusted white with snow, eyes steady but soft. "Get out," he started to say, but then Daisy's cry broke again, raw and trembling. Naya walked past him without a word. She knelt beside the bed, reaching for the children. Daisy's sobs faltered as Naya brushed her hair back. Sam's breathing slowed. Then came her voice, low, trembling but rich as river water. A lullaby in Apache. Words Ethan couldn't understand, but somehow felt. It wrapped around the room like smoke from a warm fire, softening the air, the fear, the grief. Within minutes, the house fell silent except for her song. Daisy's tiny hand gripped Naya's sleeve. Sam leaned into her chest, eyes closed. Ethan stood frozen. He hadn't seen peace in this house for years, not since Grace's last breath. And now, watching Naya with his children, he felt something dangerous stirring. Not love, not yet, but the ache of remembering what love once felt like. When her voice finally faded, she whispered in that quiet, steady way of hers, "I once lost a child. When I hear them cry, my heart remembers how to love." Ethan swallowed hard. The lantern light flickered across her face, weary, strong, sacred somehow. He didn't speak, didn't dare. But long after she slipped back into the cold, he stayed where he was, staring at the place she'd sat. The scent of cedar and smoke lingered in the air. And for the first time in years, Ethan Cole prayed, not for Grace, not for himself, but for the strange Apache woman who had walked into his house like a whisper and reminded his heart it wasn't dead after all. By the time the snow melted off the ridge, talk had already started making its rounds through Silver Ridge. In the saloon, in the general store, even outside the small church after Sunday service. The story was the same, told in low voices and knowing smirks. Ethan Coles hired himself a redskin widow, sleeps out back in the barn, sings to horses like she's calling spirits. Gossip was wildfire out here, and it didn't take long for it to find fuel. Lydia Kane, who used to cook and clean in the Cole house, was the first to feed it. She told anyone who'd listen that Naya had come to bewitch the rancher, that she'd soon have her hands on his land. "I saw it myself," she'd whisper, voice sharp as a snake's hiss. She looks at him like he's the only soul left on earth. And Porter Briggs, the ranch foreman with a habit of stirring trouble when whiskey loosened his tongue, didn't help matters. "Cole's gone soft," he said one evening by the fire. "Can't see straight with that Apache woman humming around his barn." Ethan ignored the talk, at least out loud. But he heard it, the chuckles that stopped when he walked into town, the glances that followed his wagon wheels all the way down Main Street. Still, he told himself it didn't matter. The ranch was running smooth again, the horses steady, the fences mended. And Naya kept working, quiet and steady as always. She didn't flinch when the hands whispered, or when the locals turned their backs at the market. She only lowered her eyes and went on with her chores, feeding stock, mending harness, sweeping the barn long after dark. Her silence spoke louder than any defense. One afternoon, the air was sweet with spring thaw. The sun sat low, washing the ranch in copper light. From the porch, Ethan heard a sudden cry, Daisy's voice, high and frightened. He dropped his hammer and ran. The girl had tripped near the corral, a jagged nail slicing across her leg. Sam stood frozen beside her, pale as milk. Before Ethan could reach them, Naya was already there. She tore a strip from her shawl, pressing it against the wound to stop the bleeding. Then she hurried to the barn, gathering a handful of leaves and roots from a pouch she always carried. Herbs from the desert, bitter-smelling and green. "What's that?" Ethan demanded, kneeling beside her. "Medicine," she said simply. Her hands worked quick and sure, grinding the leaves, mixing them with water, packing them against the cut. Daisy whimpered once, then sighed. Within minutes, the bleeding slowed. Ethan watched those same hands he'd once seen trembling with rope burns, now calm, deliberate, unshaken. "You saved my daughter," he said quietly. Naya shook her head. "No," she whispered, tying the last knot in the bandage. "I only helped her remember that someone still wants her to live." The words hit him like a gust of wind. For a long time after, neither of them spoke. The sun slipped behind the ridge, painting the sky in bruised gold and red. That night, Ethan sat on the porch with his coffee, listening to the coyotes sing in the distance. In the barn, he could hear Naya humming again, that same low, haunting tune that calmed even the wildest hearts. He didn't understand it. Not the song, not the woman. But somewhere deep down, respect settled in his chest, heavy and quiet. Not love, not yet. Something holier. The storm came without warning. By dusk, the sky over Silver Ridge had turned black as coal, and the wind screamed across the plains like something alive. The first clap of thunder hit so hard the windows of the Cole ranch house rattled in their frames. Ethan stood at the doorway, watching the sky split open. "She's a mean one," he muttered to himself. He'd seen storms before, dust, wind, the kind that stripped fences clean. But this was different. This one carried fury. Out in the yard, the rain came down sideways, pounding the dirt into mud. The horses cried in their stalls. The old barn roof groaned. Somewhere in that chaos, he thought he heard a faint voice. Maybe Daisy, maybe Sam. His chest tightened. He turned to check their room. Empty. The beds were cold. Daisy. Sam. His voice vanished into the thunder. He tore through the kitchen, the porch, out into the yard, boots sinking deep in the mire. The lantern he carried flickered madly, throwing ghosts of light across the storm. Then came the flash, lightning so bright it turned the whole ranch white for a heartbeat. And in that flash, he saw her. Naya. She was running across the yard, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her face, clutching the two children tight against her chest. Daisy's small arms clung to her neck. Sam's face was buried in her shoulder. "Over here!" Ethan shouted, stumbling toward them. She didn't stop until they reached the storage shed, shoving the door open with her shoulder. Inside, the roof barely held. Water dripped through cracks. Thunder rolled above like gunfire. Naya dropped to her knees, wrapping her body over the children as another gust slammed the door shut behind them. Ethan knelt beside her, breathless, dripping. The lantern light flickered over her torn shawl, her trembling hands, the blood from a cut on her cheek. "Why didn't you take cover?" he demanded, his voice breaking. "You could have been killed out there." Her eyes met his, steady even through the storm. "Apache don't leave anyone behind in the wind," she said. He swallowed hard. "Even those who don't believe in you?" She looked at him then, not angry, not proud, just honest. Even them. For a long moment, the only sound was rain beating on the tin roof. Ethan watched the way she held his children, how her own body shook but her arms never loosened. Something inside him cracked wide open, the same way thunder splits the sky. All this time, he had built walls around himself, cold and high, thinking they'd keep the pain out. But this woman, this quiet, stubborn Apache widow, had walked straight through them without trying. By morning, the storm had passed. The sun broke through, sharp and golden, steaming off puddles of mud. The ranch hand stood silent as Ethan walked out onto the porch, Daisy and Sam beside him, Naya behind them, her face pale but calm. He looked at his crew, Red Davis, Frank Owens, Jed Carter, even Porter Briggs, who tried not to meet his eye. Ethan's voice was steady. "From this day forward," he said, "she's not just help, she's family." No one spoke. The wind blew soft, carrying the smell of wet earth and cedar. Naya stood still, not smiling, not weeping, but her eyes, deep and dark as the canyon, said what words never could. And for the first time since Grace died, the Cole Ranch didn't feel like a house haunted by loss. It felt like home. In Silver Ridge, storms of the heart lasted longer than storms in the sky. The rain had passed, but bitterness, that stayed. Folks in town didn't like what they couldn't understand, and they sure didn't understand why Ethan Cole let a widow of Apache blood live under his roof. It started small. Whispers over whiskey, half-truths traded like poker chips. Then one morning, Ethan walked out onto the porch and froze. A rough board had been hammered into the dirt by the front gate. Carved deep into it, with crude, uneven letters, were the words, "Thief of the Dead." Someone had drawn a crooked feather beneath it, a cruel imitation of Naya's people. The words cut deeper than any blade. Naya found it first. She stood for a long while in the gray light of dawn, the hem of her skirt brushing against the wet grass. She didn't cry at first. She just stared at the sign, at what it meant, that no matter how much she gave, they would always see her as less. Then she knelt down, pulled the sign out of the ground, and set it gently on the porch. Her hands trembled only once. When Ethan came out and saw it, his jaw tightened. "Who did this?" Naya shook her head. "It doesn't matter." But her voice cracked on the last word, and that broke something inside him. By noon, he had called every man on the ranch into the yard. Frank Owens, Red Davis, Jed Carter, and even Porter Briggs, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The wind picked up the dust as they gathered, the smell of rain still clinging to the air. Ethan held up the sign for all to see. "You recognize this?" he said. No one answered. Porter shifted his weight, eyes down. Red spat in the dirt, uneasy. Ethan slammed the sign into the ground. "I won't have this on my land." His voice was low but carried like thunder. "You hear me? Not on my land, not on my watch." Still silence. Then Ethan looked straight at them, his eyes hard but not angry, more like a man who'd had enough. "She risked her life for my children, for your children, for this ranch. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects me." His words hit with the force of conviction, not pride. There was no sermon in them, just plain truth. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Frank nodded slowly. Red followed. Even Jed mumbled something under his breath that sounded like an apology. Only Porter stayed silent, arms crossed tight, jaw clenched, but he didn't speak against him either. That night, as the sky dimmed over the hills, Naya stood by the corral, watching the last light fade. Ethan came to stand beside her. Neither said much. They didn't need to. "People fear what they don't know," she said finally. "Yeah," he replied, watching the horizon. "But some of us are learning." The horses nickered softly behind them, calm and unafraid. The ranch, for the first time in years, felt whole, scarred, but whole. And in that fragile quiet, loyalty took root, not born from fear or debt, but from respect. The wind that night carried the kind of silence that made a man uneasy. The moon hid behind thick clouds, and the land stretched black and endless around Silver Ridge. Inside the ranch house, the lamps flickered low. Ethan Cole had fallen asleep in his chair, boots still on, his rifle propped nearby. The day had been long, but peaceful. For the first time in months, the place had felt still. Too still. Then came the scream. It wasn't loud, but it cut clean through the dark. Ethan's eyes snapped open. He rushed down the hall to the children's room, empty. Beds unmade, covers tossed aside. He ran to the porch, calling their names, but the only answer was the wind whistling through the fence line. He saw them then, 2 sets of small footprints in the mud, heading toward the woods beyond the creek. Ethan didn't waste a breath. He grabbed his coat, his lantern, and his Winchester. "Naya!" he shouted. She was already there, running from the barn with her hair loose and her eyes wide. "They went toward Hollow Hill," she said, breathless. "I can feel it." They mounted the horses and rode into the dark. The lantern light swung wildly, slicing through rain mist and tangled branches. Ethan's heart pounded so loud he couldn't hear the storm anymore. Just the thought of Daisy's laugh, Sam's small hand gripping his thumb. After nearly an hour of riding, they saw it, a faint glow deep in the trees, the shape of an old hunting shack leaning crooked against the night. Ethan pulled the horse to a stop, lifted his rifle. Through the half-broken window, he saw Lydia Kane pacing, her face pale in the firelight. Beside her stood a man Ethan didn't know, tall, rough, a long scar running from his temple down to his jaw. Clay Boone. The children were huddled in a corner, eyes wide, too scared to cry. Ethan kicked the door open. "Let them go." Lydia spun, her voice breaking between anger and madness. "You're blind, Ethan. She's here to take everything from you. Your ranch, your blood, your name." Clay raised his revolver, aiming straight at Naya. "He ain't gonna see the truth till she's gone." Ethan stepped in front of her, the rifle steady in his hands, though his heart hammered in his chest. "You want her?" he said quietly. "You'll have to shoot through me first." Lightning cracked outside, white and fierce. For a split second, the room froze. The kids, the outlaws, the storm itself holding its breath. Then Naya moved. She grabbed a heavy log from the fireplace and swung. The gun went off, deafening in the small room, the bullet burying itself in the wall. Clay stumbled, the pistol flying from his hand. Ethan tackled him to the floor. The 2 men fought hard, fists, boots, rage, until the sound of horses and shouting filled the woods. The Silver Ridge deputies had arrived, lanterns blazing, rifles drawn. When it was over, Clay Boone was hauled away in cuffs, Lydia screaming his name as they dragged her out. Ethan stood over the children, his breath ragged. Naya knelt beside Daisy and Sam, holding them tight, whispering words in her Apache tongue, words Ethan didn't understand, but that somehow sounded like prayers. As dawn broke over the ridge, light filtered through the cracked window, painting gold across Naya's face. Ethan looked at her, truly looked. The woman who had once been a stranger now knelt in his home, like a guardian carved from mercy and grit. He said nothing, just reached out and rested his hand over hers. For the first time, she didn't pull away. Word of the kidnapping spread faster than prairie fire. By dawn, every man, woman, and gossip in Silver Ridge knew that Ethan Cole had ridden through a thunderstorm to save his children, and that the woman beside him wasn't his wife, but the Apache widow the town had been whispering about for months. By noon, the church bell was ringing, calling folks together. The old white building on Main Street had never seen a crowd so thick. Dust rose under their boots as they gathered. Ranchers, shopkeepers, wives clutching shawls, even the sheriff. Everyone wanted to see what Ethan Cole had to say. Inside, the air was tight, thick with judgment. Reverend Hayes stood by the pulpit, his Bible open, his face grave. Ethan sat near the front, his clothes still caked with dried mud, the cut on his cheek half-healed. He looked like a man who'd fought not just a storm, but a whole world. When the Reverend asked him to speak, Ethan stood slowly. Every eye turned. He took off his hat, set it on the pew, and looked straight at the crowd. His voice came low but steady. "I know what you've all heard," he said. "That I let a woman of Apache blood into my home. That she's after my land, my family, maybe even my soul." He paused, the only sound the creak of old wood beneath boots. But let me tell you what I do know. That woman didn't take anything from me. She gave me back something I thought was gone forever. My own damn heart. A murmur rippled through the pews. Ethan went on, his voice rough with truth. When my wife, Grace, died, I buried more than her. I buried everything good in me. I forgot what it meant to feel, to care, to fight for something worth keeping. Then Naya came along, worked harder than any man I've ever hired. She saved my kids, risked her life for them. You can call her what you want, but she's the reason my family's still breathing. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Reverend Hayes nodded and gestured toward Naya, who sat near the back, quiet as a shadow. Mrs. Naya, he said gently, would you like to speak? The room shifted. Naya rose, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. Her eyes moved across the crowd, faces hard as rock, waiting for her to stumble. She didn't speak. Instead, she walked to the blackboard near the pulpit, picked up a piece of chalk, and wrote in large, careful letters, I don't want land. I just want to be trusted. When she turned around, the church was silent. You could have heard the dust settle. At the back of the room, Ruth Boone, an older woman with silver hair and a cane, stood up. Her voice trembled but carried across the church. If that woman can survive a storm like that, with 2 children not her own in her arms, she's earned her place here. We ought to be ashamed it took this long to see it. No one moved for a heartbeat. Then someone clapped, once, hesitant. Then another joined. Soon the sound filled the church, echoing against the rafters like thunder rolling off the ridge. Ethan turned toward Naya. Her head was bowed, tears glinting at the corner of her eyes. Not from sorrow this time, but from release. For the first time since she set foot on this land, the people of Silver Ridge didn't see an outsider. They saw a woman worth standing for. Spring came early that year, rolling over Silver Ridge with soft winds and skies the color of new hope. Down by the river, cottonwood trees shed their white blossoms, and the air was full of drifting petals that looked almost like snow, only warmer, kinder. The whole town turned out that morning. It wasn't often folks in Silver Ridge gathered for something that wasn't a funeral or a fight. But today was different. Today, they came to watch redemption take root beneath the same soil that once held their doubts. Ethan Cole stood beneath the old oak tree by the riverbank, the one where he'd once buried his wife, Grace. He wore a vest that had seen better days and a clean white shirt that still carried the scent of the land. His hands shook a little, not from nerves but from the weight of what the day meant. He looked out at the faces gathered, the ranch hands, Red Davis, Frank Owens, Jed Carter, even Porter Briggs, who'd traded his shame for silence. Ruth Boone stood near the front, cane in hand, her old eyes soft with pride. Then the music started, a single fiddle playing slow and sweet. From behind the crowd, Naya stepped forward. She wore a plain cotton dress, the color of morning light. Her hair was braided in the Apache way, and tucked behind her ear was a single white feather, a symbol of peace among her people. The wind caught her shawl, lifting it just enough to make her look almost unearthly, like a spirit walking out of the desert. Every head turned. Even the birds seemed to hush. When she reached him, Ethan took her hand, his rough fingers trembling against her smooth, sun-warmed skin. Reverend Hayes opened his worn Bible and began to speak, his voice carrying over the rustle of trees and the murmur of the river. The Lord grants courage to those who dare to trust again, he said. May he bless these two who have walked through loss and found each other waiting on the other side. The words fell like a prayer over the land itself. Daisy and Sam stepped forward, scattering wildflowers at their feet. yellow, white, and red, the same colors that painted the Wyoming plains in spring. Ethan smiled down at them, then looked back at Naya. His voice was quiet, thick with emotion. "I lost my wife," he said, "but I found my family again." Naya looked up, her eyes glistening like river stones. "And I lost my child," she whispered, "but I found my heart again." The crowd went still, the wind slowed, and for one breathless moment, time seemed to fold in on itself. Past pain meeting present peace. When Reverend Hayes pronounced them husband and wife, the church bell from town rang out across the valley, echoing through the cottonwoods. The children laughed, running in circles beneath the falling blossoms. Ethan turned to Naya and kissed her hand. Around them, the land, the very same that once judged them, now looked washed clean, renewed. He didn't see ghosts anymore when he looked at that oak tree. He saw a promise kept, a family reborn, and a love strong enough to survive the storms. The evening sun bled across the Wyoming plains, turning the world to fire. The land stretched wide and golden, rolling toward the horizon where clouds burned crimson and violet. The kind of sunset that made a man believe heaven might not be so far away after all. Down below, the Cole Ranch was alive again. Horses ran free in the pasture, their manes catching light like copper ribbons. The sound of laughter floated through the air, Daisy chasing Sam across the yard, their giggles echoing off the barn walls. The house that once knew only silence now breathed with life. Ethan stood by the fence, one hand resting on the rail. He watched as Naya walked from the barn, wiping her hands on her apron, her hair unbound and kissed by the wind. To the folks of Silver Ridge, she was no longer the stranger. They called her something softer now, the Apache Mother. The name carried respect, not pity. She had become part of the land, as rooted and enduring as the cottonwoods by the river. Ethan called out to her, voice low and easy. "Come on," he said. "Let's take the kids up the hill before the light's gone." The four of them walked together through tall grass, the sky above them glowing like embers. The hill rose gently, leading to a small wooden cross that overlooked the valley, Grace Cole's resting place. Wildflowers grew thick around it, planted by Naya and tended by Daisy's tiny hands. They stopped there, standing side by side in the whispering wind. Ethan took off his hat, holding it against his chest. "She taught me how to love," he said quietly, his voice breaking with gratitude and ache. "But you, Naya, you taught me how to forgive." Naya didn't answer at first. She just reached out and touched the cross, fingers tracing the name carved into the wood. Then she looked up at him, her eyes deep and steady. "And you taught me," she said softly, "that even a heart shattered by loss can still beat again." The children stood between them, silent but smiling, Daisy clutching her father's hand, Sam leaning against Naya's skirt. The wind moved through the grass, like the breath of something divine. Below, the ranch shimmered in the fading light, alive with color and memory, a place no longer divided by blood or sorrow, but bound together by second chances. As the last rays dipped behind the ridge, Ethan slipped his arm around Naya's shoulders. Together they watched the sky turn from scarlet to gold, then to the deep blue of night. No words were spoken. None were needed. The silence itself was holy, the kind only found by those who had lost everything and learned to live again. When they turned back toward home, lanterns were already glowing in the windows, and smoke curled gently from the chimney. Life, simple, imperfect, and enduring, waited for them there. And on that hill, beneath the red sky of the west, the past finally rested.